At the reception, my in-laws mocked my ring until my husband revealed who bought it. I never imagined that the happiest day of my life would turn into a moment where I'd have to defend something as personal as my engagement ring. But standing there, surrounded by guests, champagne glasses clinking, laughter filling the air, I felt smaller than I'd ever felt before. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how my wedding reception became the stage for a revelation that changed everything. Before we dive deeper into what happened that night, I'd love to know where you were watching this from. Drop a comment below telling me your country and city. It's amazing to connect with people from all over the world who share these stories with me. Now let me take you back to where it all began. When Michael proposed to me on a rainy evening in Portland, I didn't care about the size of the diamond or the brand of the ring. What mattered was the man kneeling in front of me, his eyes filled with tears, asking me to spend forever with him. The ring was simple, elegant, a thin gold band with a modest diamond that caught the light in the most beautiful way. To me, it was perfect. It represented us, our love, our journey together. Michael worked as a high school teacher, and I was a nurse at the local hospital. We weren't wealthy, but we were rich in the ways that mattered. We had each other, we had our dreams, and we had a love that felt unshakable. The months leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of planning, compromises, and excitement. But there was an undercurrent of tension that I tried my best to ignore. Michael's family came from money. His father, Robert, was a successful real estate developer, and his mother, Patricia, well, she made it her life's mission to remind everyone of their status. From the first time I met them at a stiff dinner party at their mansion in the suburbs, I knew I didn't quite fit their vision of who their son should marry. Patricia had made subtle comments about my profession, about my family's modest background, about the neighborhood I grew up in. Nothing overtly cruel, just enough to make me feel like I was constantly being measured and found lacking. Michael's younger sister, Amanda, wasn't much better. She was a lawyer at a prestigious firm downtown, always dressed in designer clothes, always ready with a cutting remark disguised as a joke. During one of our wedding planning meetings, she'd looked at my ring and said with a laugh, "Oh, how quaint! Very vintage." The word vintage hung in the air like an insult. Michael had squeezed my hand under the table, but he didn't say anything. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that once we were married, once they saw how happy Michael was, things would get better. The wedding day itself was beautiful. We got married in a small church in downtown Portland, surrounded by friends and family. My parents sat in the front row, my mother crying happy tears, my father beaming with pride. Michael looked at me like I was the only person in the world, and when we said our vows, I felt like nothing could touch us. The ceremony was intimate, heartfelt, everything I'd dreamed of. But it was the reception where everything fell apart. We'd rented a beautiful venue overlooking the Columbia River. String lights hung from the ceiling, flowers adorned every table, and a jazz band played softly in the corner. The atmosphere was magical. Guests mingled, toasted to our happiness, and the evening seemed to unfold perfectly. That is, until dinner was served and the speeches began. Michael's father stood up first, his speech polished and rehearsed, talking about legacy and family traditions. Then came my father, his voice cracking with emotion, as he talked about watching his little girl grow up and finding a man worthy of her. The room was filled with warmth and love. I thought nothing could ruin this moment. But then Patricia stood up. She didn't ask for the microphone. She simply took it from the MC's hand with the confidence of someone who was used to being the center of attention. She smiled that tight, practiced smile of hers and began to speak. At first, it seemed like a normal mother of the groom speech. She talked about Michael as a child, his accomplishments, his bright future. But then her tone shifted, became sharper, more pointed. She started talking about the importance of matching standards, of maintaining certain expectations in marriage. The room grew quieter. I felt Michael tense beside me. Then Patricia turned to me, her eyes cold despite her smile. "And Claire," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "we welcome you into our family, even though you come from such different circumstances." There were a few uncomfortable laughs from guests who didn't quite know how to react. My cheeks burned. But she wasn't done. She gestured toward my hand, toward my ring. "I mean, look at that sweet little ring Michael got you. So humble, so simple. Nothing like the family heirlooms we have, but I suppose it suits you perfectly." The room went silent. I felt every eye turn toward my hand, toward the ring I'd cherished since the day Michael proposed. Amanda snickered from her table, whispering something to her husband. Robert looked down at his plate, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. My parents looked horrified. Michael's jaw clenched, his face flushing red. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to run out of that room and never come back. My eyes filled with tears, but I refused to let them fall. I wouldn't give Patricia the satisfaction. Michael's hand found mine under the table. He squeezed it tight and I could feel the anger radiating from him. For a moment, I thought he might let it go, that he'd pull me aside later and we'd deal with it privately. But then he stood up. He stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. The room fell even more silent, if that was possible. Every guest turned to look at him. Patricia's smile faltered just slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Michael took the microphone from his mother's hand, not roughly, but firmly enough that she had no choice but to let it go. He looked at her for a long moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Then he turned to face the crowd, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I need to say something," he began, "because I cannot let this moment pass without setting the record straight." He glanced down at me, his eyes soft and apologetic, then back at the room. "My mother just made some comments about Claire's engagement ring, about how simple it is, about how it doesn't match our family's standards." Patricia tried to interrupt, tried to laugh it off as a joke, but Michael held up his hand. "Let me finish, Mom." His voice was firm, respectful, but unyielding. The room was so quiet you could hear the river flowing outside. "What my mother doesn't know, what I haven't told anyone until now, is who actually bought that ring." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I looked up at him, confused. I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he'd bought the ring. He'd proposed with it. What was he talking about? Michael's eyes met mine, and I saw something there I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. Gratitude. Love so deep it made my breath catch. "Claire's father bought that ring," he said quietly, and the room erupted in gasps and whispers. I felt my world tilt. "What? My father?" I looked across the room to where my dad sat, and his eyes were glistening with tears. My mother had her hand over her mouth, crying. I didn't understand. Michael continued, his voice thick with emotion. "A few months before I proposed, I went to Claire's father to ask for his blessing. We sat in his living room, and I told him about my plans, about how much I loved his daughter, about the future I wanted to build with her." He paused, swallowing hard. Her father looked at me and said, "Do you have a ring yet?" I told him I was saving up, that I wanted to get her something special, but that money was tight. I was honest with him. I didn't try to impress him or pretend I was something I wasn't. Michael's voice broke slightly. "And you know what he did? He went to his bedroom and came back with a small velvet box. Inside was this ring. It had belonged to Claire's grandmother, a woman who raised 3 children, worked 2 jobs, and never complained once. A woman who knew the value of love over luxury." Tears were streaming down my face now. I couldn't stop them. I looked at my father, and he nodded at me, smiling through his own tears. Michael turned to face Patricia, his mother, the woman who'd just tried to humiliate me in front of everyone we loved. Her father handed me that ring and said, "Give this to my daughter. Not because you can't afford your own, but because I want her to carry a piece of her grandmother with her always. I want her to know that real love, the kind that lasts, isn't measured in carats or price tags. It's measured in sacrifice, in commitment, in showing up every single day." The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia's face had gone pale. Amanda looked down at her lap, suddenly very interested in her napkin. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. Michael's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "So when you mock this ring, Mom, when you suggest it is not good enough, you're not just insulting me or my financial situation. You were insulting a man who worked his entire life to provide for his family. You were insulting a grandmother who sacrificed everything for her children. You were insulting the very foundation of what Claire comes from, values that I'm proud to be marrying into." He turned back to the crowd, his hand still holding mine. This ring represents everything that matters. It represents family, history, love that transcends generations. It represents a father-in-law who trusted me with his most precious gift, his daughter, and gave me a symbol of that trust. I couldn't be more honored to have put this ring on Clara's finger, and anyone who suggests it as not enough clearly doesn't understand what real value means. The room erupted, not in whispers or awkward silence, but in applause. Genuine, thunderous applause. My father stood up, tears running down his face, clapping harder than anyone. My mother was sobbing. Our friends were cheering. Even some of Michael's extended family members who'd been silent before were now applauding, some wiping their own eyes. Patricia sat frozen in her seat, her face a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been shame. Amanda had disappeared to the bathroom. Robert finally stood up and began clapping, a gesture that seemed more about saving face than genuine support, but it was something. Michael sat back down beside me and pulled me into his arms. I buried my face in his shoulder and cried, not from humiliation anymore, but from overwhelming love and gratitude. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into my hair. "I should have told you sooner. I should have said something the first time she made a comment. I'm so sorry." I pulled back to look at him, my hands cupping his face. "You just gave me the greatest gift," I said through my tears. "You stood up for me. You stood up for my family. You showed everyone what kind of man you are." He kissed me then, in front of everyone, a kiss that felt like a promise, like a shield, like everything we'd ever need. The rest of the reception was different after that. The energy shifted. People came up to us all night, telling us how moved they were, how beautiful the story was. My father and Michael embraced for a long time, both of them emotional in a way I'd never seen before. My mother couldn't stop hugging me, telling me how proud she was, how lucky we were to have found each other. Patricia left early, claiming a headache. She didn't say goodbye to us, didn't apologize, just gathered her things and left with Robert trailing behind her, looking uncomfortable and defeated. Amanda followed shortly after. Before she left, though, she stopped by our table. She didn't quite look at me, but she said to Michael, "That was really something, what you said." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. It was more than I expected from her. The weeks and months that followed were complicated. Michael's relationship with his mother became strained. She didn't call as often. When she did, conversations were awkward, stilted. She never directly apologized to me, but she stopped making comments about my background, my career, my family. It was as if Michael's speech had drawn a line she now knew not to cross. Robert reached out to Michael privately, told him he was proud of how he'd handled things, that he wished he'd spoken up more over the years. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. Amanda and I would never be close, but there was a grudging respect between us now. She sent us a nice housewarming gift when we moved into our first home, a simple card that said, "Wishing you both the best." It wasn't much, but it was a start. My relationship with my father deepened in ways I hadn't expected. Knowing that he'd given Michael my grandmother's ring, that he'd been part of our engagement story in such a profound way, made me see him differently. We talked more, shared more, and I found myself calling him for advice on everything from home repairs to life decisions. Michael and I built our life together on the foundation of that moment. Every time I looked at my ring, I didn't just see a piece of jewelry. I saw my grandmother's strength, my father's love, Michael's courage, and the reminder that real value isn't found in price tags or status symbols. It's found in the people who stand beside you, who fight for you, who see you for who you really are and love you anyway. Our marriage wasn't perfect. We had disagreements, tough times, moments when money was tight and stress was high. But we always came back to that night, to the moment when Michael chose us over appearances, love over status, truth over comfortable silence. Years later, when we had our first child, a daughter, we named her Grace. Grace for the grandmother whose ring I wore. Grace for the way love can transform a moment of humiliation into something beautiful. Grace for second chances and families that grow and heal. Patricia came to the hospital to meet her granddaughter. She held Grace carefully, her eyes soft in a way I'd rarely seen. She looked at me and said simply, "She's beautiful, Claire." It wasn't an apology for the wedding, wasn't an acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. but it was something. It was a bridge, however small. I took it. Looking back now, I realized that wedding reception was a gift in disguise. It revealed who Michael truly was, what our marriage would be built on. It showed me that sometimes the most painful moments can become the most defining ones. It taught me that standing up for what matters, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you relationships, is always worth it. And it reminded me that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or family names. It's measured in the people who show up for you, who defend you, who see your worth when others try to diminish it. That simple gold band with its modest diamond sits on my finger right now as I tell you this story. It is more valuable to me than any mansion, any designer label, any symbol of status could ever be. Because every time I look at it, I remember my grandmother's legacy, my father's trust, and my husband's unwavering love. I remember that I come from strength, that I married into courage, and that together we built something that no amount of money could buy. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt like you weren't enough, like you didn't measure up to someone else's standards, I want you to hear this. Your worth isn't determined by what you own, where you come from, or how others perceive you. Your worth is inherent, beautiful, and unchangeable. Find people who see that, who celebrate that, who stand up for that. And when someone tries to diminish you, remember that their judgment says more about them than it ever could about you. True class isn't about money or status. It is about how you treat people, how you honor what matters, and how you choose love over pride every single time. If this story touched you, if it resonated with something you've experienced or felt, I'd love to hear about it. Hit that subscribe button and share your own story in the comments below. Have you ever had a moment where someone stood up for you in a way that changed everything? Have you ever had to defend something precious against someone who didn't understand its value? Let's create a community where we lift each other up, where we celebrate what truly matters, and where we remind each other that we are enough, exactly as we are. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until next time, remember that the most precious things in life can't be bought. They can only be given, received, and cherished.